So just call me brother when you need a hand. We all need somebody to lean on. I just might have a problem that you understand. We all need somebody to lean on.
Ladies and gentlemen, please silence your mobile devices. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kemp Forum on Expanding Opportunity. We invite you to turn your attention to the video screens.
No government has been able to do for people what people have been able to do for themselves when they had that opportunity. We must not only fight, we must win the war on poverty by enlisting the greatest weapon ever invented in the history of the world, free enterprise. The American society as a whole can never achieve the outer reaches of its potential so long as it tolerates the inner cities of despair. The American dream is not to make everyone level with everyone else, but to create the opportunity for all people to reach as high as their God-given potential allows.
Hello. You can say good morning back. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jimmy Kemp, and I'm the president of the Jack Kemp Foundation. And we are thrilled to be here in Columbia, South Carolina. As you heard the words from my father, he talked about creating opportunity for all people. That's what we're going to be talking about today, how to create opportunity for all people in this great country where we live. I'd be remiss to be in South Carolina and coming from a football family and not mentioning that this is a phenomenal time in South Carolina. Now, despite the fact that I went to Wake Forest University and played football at Wake Forest, I'll be cheering for the Clemson Tigers Monday night. And I'm fortunate enough to have played with some guys who have played for the Carolina Panthers, and the Panthers are having a phenomenal year. In D.C., we're getting a glimpse of what good football looks like right now, but you all have a plethora of talented football players here in South Carolina, and fun month of January. Please give a round of applause to the Dream Seeds Jazz Band, who's here from Rochester, New York. Those young people, they're about the ages of my sons. My wife Susan and I have 4 boys who are aged 9, 12, 14, and 17. Those are about the same ages as those players in the jazz band who were once homeless. And they were brought by a group called Sojourners out of homelessness into transitional housing. And talk about expanding opportunity. The people who invested in those young people and helped bring them their talents out, that's the story of expanding opportunity. It's the story of love. It's what you and I need to be successful. We all need love. And that band was a great demonstration of that. Give them another round of applause. Thank you. You know, one of the greatest gifts that my dad gave our family was a legacy of goodwill. And that goodwill is on display here. We're so fortunate to have the candidates who are coming today, to have Speaker Ryan and Senator Scott. And I want to remind you all, part of the purpose of the Kemp Foundation and why we're here. Our mission is to develop, engage, and recognize exceptional leaders who champion the American idea. And that American idea is the human idea, the idea that every person is born with the possibility to become all that he or she was created to be. And here in America, that idea is given a time and a place to happen. And we want to keep advancing the American idea, not only for our children, but for our children's children. The other part of what matters to me so much is to remind people in our great country that public service is a calling, it's a vocation. And you're going to see on display today a number of candidates, you're going to see political leaders who believe that they have a calling and that their calling is public service. It is a high calling. Each of us is called to something different. But I can tell you that, and many of you already know it, but Senator Scott and Speaker Ryan display a humility, a recognition that other people are important and critical to their own success. And I think it's really important that our country understands how important it is that we value the public service of people who are willing to go in. Certainly not everybody is in it for the most pure reasons, but we have many who truly want to serve, and it's an honor. I do want to just thank our premier sponsor, Opportunity Lives. You're going to hear more about them as the day goes on. I also want to thank the American Enterprise Institute and the Economic Innovation Group, organizations who have helped us prepare for this. And we want to continue the conversation. We don't want this day to simply be a day when we have a great meeting. We want you all to stay engaged. And in the age of social media, while we want you to interact with each other face to face and not be like some of our teenagers just looking at screens, we do have a hashtag. Our hashtag is hashtag KempForum16. And we also would love for you all to go to kempforum.com and register with us as an opportunity voter. If what is set up here resonates with you, we want you to sign up and mark yourself as an opportunity voter and stay in touch with us as we continue to do events like this around the country, focusing on the American idea. To start our day, we can think of no better way in this great country than to recognize our Creator. So I would like to invite the Reverend Dr. Charles Jackson to come out and bless our proceedings today. Please welcome Dr. Charles Jackson. Thank you.
Let us bow our heads in prayer. Eternal God, our Heavenly Father, to whom the earth belongs, the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. We acknowledge you as the Lord of all life, the source of all truth, and the fountain of all goodness. So we look to you just now for the inspiration and guidance that you and you alone can give. Our hearts are filled with gladness, and our spirits overflow with thanksgiving. We thank you for the promises and privileges you have afforded us by your grace and your mercy. We thank you for the blessing of this day, for awakening us with new mercies. And we ask, Heavenly Father, for the favor of this day with your wisdom and direction. Order our steps according to your word. We thank you for this great nation of America and the principles, the Judean Christian principles upon which this nation was established by our founding fathers. We pray, dear God, for the honoring of those values, the sustaining of those values, the passing of those values on to generations that succeed us. We thank you, God, for being a God whose plan is to prosper us and not to harm us, to give us hope and a future. We pray, dear God, that we will always honor the tenets of our faith with truth and integrity. We thank you, Heavenly Father, also for the cause, the purpose that calls us together this day. We invoke your presence upon this event so that all said and done will be pleasing and acceptable in your sight and in accord with what your will is for our lives. Instill into the hearts of these your people each day a fresh confidence in your goodness. Strengthen our faith and increase our capacity for understanding and compassion for others, even the least of these. Let us, Heavenly Father, strive in policy and principle and practice for every American to have the full potential of a quality life through our service and goodwill. Our prayer this morning is to the end that your will might be done on earth as it is in heaven. This is your servant's prayer in the wonderfully saving name of Jesus our Christ. Amen, and thank God.
Amen. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. Thank you. Let me get a picture.
I don't think they're ready for it.
They were good. They're good. Thank you, Dr. Jackson. So one other great point. You all are witnessing something that, or will witness something that I don't think has happened before. In fact, we checked and it hasn't happened before. To have a Speaker of the House of Representatives, the third in the line of succession, to engage with presidential candidates. And not only that, but to do it about a subject that isn't typically talked about. How to expand opportunity, how to reduce poverty, something that we all care about, something that's critical in this great country. So we're really in for a treat. And on the point that I mentioned earlier, I'd love it if we could recognize the public servants who we have in our midst today. I don't know if they're here yet, and we still have some people finding their seats. But if any members of Congress are here, would you please stand up and be recognized? We have one, thank you. Do we have any state legislators? Any state legislators here yet? Is it Diane? Great. From Missouri, right? Is it Diane Kendrick? Franklin, that's right. Diane Franklin, who's here from Missouri. We're thrilled to have her. Any other public servants who should stand up and be recognized? We know people are kind of coming in. I have one other person I'd like to recognize. We have someone who's traveled here from the Ukraine, or from Ukraine. I'm not supposed to say the Ukraine, right, Sandy? We have the former Ukrainian foreign minister and former ambassador to the United States from Ukraine, Konstantin Grishenko, who may be backstage, but we're thrilled that he's here and grateful for him to come here from the Ukraine. It's a bad habit. So there are a couple of changes in your program. Miss Carly Fiorina, unfortunately, missed her plane. So we have a change in the program. Miss Fiorina will not be able to join us today, we don't think, unless something happens that I don't know about, which is possible. So we're very disappointed. She's disappointed. We will shrink the second panel with Governor Huckabee accordingly, but things will basically stay the same. Now, in your programs, it says that Governor Christie is on the second panel. So you would think that we had planned this well and we had two on the second panel. However, Governor Christie is actually on the first panel. So on the first panel, you'll have Governor Christie, Dr. Carson, and Governor Bush. And then the second panel will be Governor Huckabee. We're expanding the first panel a little bit, shrinking the second panel. Basically, the timing will stay the same. And here's what you need to know about food. If you're like me, you get hungry. We've got box lunches for everybody. There will be a lot of people coming in and out, but upstairs, is where the boxed lunches will be, and in the program you'll see a couple of breaks. There's a break after the second panel and then a longer break after the third panel, and you'll be able to get lunch up there. Is anybody on our staff around to tell me what I've forgotten to say? Hopefully nothing. Again, thank you all for being here. I'd like for you to welcome Anita Zucker, the chair and CEO of the Intertech Group. Ms. Zucker is a tireless advocate for economic development initiatives here in South Carolina and other philanthropic causes. And she sums up her personal philosophy in 2 words, tikkun olam. It's a Hebrew phrase from the 3rd century, which means repair the world. That's why we're here. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anita Zucker. Hello, Anita. Nice to meet you.
Thank you so much. Nice to meet you, too. Good morning, everyone. How honored I am to be here this morning. And thank you so much for mentioning Tikkun Olam, because to my family and to me, that's one of our guiding values, our main guiding value. And it is all about repairing the world. And I have the honor this morning of introducing a very special person, our U.S. Senator Tim Scott, who is a dear friend. Tim and I have been friends for over 25 years. I actually got to know him before he ever served in office. And Tim is amazing because his life's mission is about positively affecting the lives of 1 billion people through a message of hope and opportunity. Scott grew up in a poor, single-parent household in North Charleston, South Carolina, and uses the challenges and the lessons of his youth to power his agenda in the United States Senate, and that is just so critically important. Senator Scott's opportunity agenda is focused on guaranteeing a high quality of education for all of our nation's students, ensuring access to job training and workforce development programs, and creating a government that empowers the American people, not Washington, D.C. Tim knows that success is created in studio apartments and garages, at kitchen tables, and in classrooms across the nation, not in government conference rooms in Washington, D.C. And let me say, prior to being sworn into the Senate, Senator Scott served in the United States House of Representatives from 2011 to 2013. He also served in our state legislature as a representative from our region, and he spent 13 years on county council in Charleston, where he served 4 terms as chair of our county council and was an incredibly effective council person, as well as an effective person in every role that he's had. And today I see nothing but wonderful things ahead. He was elected chairman of the freshman caucus when he got to Washington, D.C., and was a House whip. He was the owner of Tim Scott Allstate and partner of Pathway Real Estate Group, and he was extremely successful as someone in the private sector, and he's been nothing but successful representing our wonderful state of South Carolina and our entire country. So thank you, and again, I'm honored to introduce U.S. Senator Tim Scott. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning. How are y'all doing out there? I could hear this side. I couldn't hear this side. Let me try it one more time. How are y'all over here? Awesome, awesome. It is an excellent opportunity for us to be here, Joe. It's good to see you as well. I think it's an exciting time in this nation's history for the Republican Party and for people who believe that conservative principles are truly the way to eliminate and to eradicate poverty. It is a good time to be sitting here today. Now, let me just, before we get into the actual message of the day, I want to ask a non-political question. How many rolled Tide in the audience today? Let us pray for them real quick. How many Go Tigers are in the office today? Awesome, awesome. Well, hopefully on Monday we'll have a major victory bringing it back home to South Carolina. I'm excited about that opportunity. Although I'm a Gamecock fan, I am now a Clemson Tiger fan. Well, today we'll have an opportunity to hear from 6 of our presidential candidates about their solutions to fight a challenging issue that our nation consistently has faced: how to eliminate poverty. And I will tell you that as a kid growing up in a single-parent household, I have learned firsthand that conservative principles absolutely, positively, unequivocally is the best path forward to eliminate poverty. Thanks to the Kemp Foundation, Opportunity Lives, for investing in this day and making this possible. I'd also like to say thank you to the 6 candidates you'll see on stage for being here, for making sure that the conservative principles are on stage so that people can understand and appreciate that we know what the solutions are. And remember this final comment: people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. It's going to be a good day. God bless.
Thank you. All right, well, as part of having Opportunity Lives here, one of the treats that you all get with me is to turn your attention to the video screen. In 2012, after then Chairman Paul Ryan, who was the vice presidential nominee, after they lost the campaign, Paul Ryan went to Bob Woodson, who you'll meet later today, and said, "Bob, I was inspired when I met some folks on the campaign trail, people who told me their stories of overcoming adversity. Bob, you do work in lots of communities around the country." "Yes, I do, Paul." "Well, would you take me around the country? I want to listen to the stories. I want to understand what works and what doesn't work, what role government should have, and where government is doing things that actually hurt folks." So Opportunity Lives is telling these stories of overcoming adversity and talking about the triumphs of personal courage and determination. These are the inspiration for this project that started because Paul Ryan cares and wanted to hear stories of people who had overcome great things. So Opportunity Lives is as a website, opportunitylives.com, and you can see this comeback video series. We're going to play a trailer to it. It's produced and directed by a friend of mine, videographer Claire Burns, and the comeback miniseries provides this glimpse into what Bob Woodson calls the hidden wellsprings of hope in our local communities. So while we will hear from political leaders, I promise you that they're coming, it's essential that we remind ourselves who are the true experts. It's the people who are on the front lines living this day in and day out. So here's a trailer for the comeback series.
46218.
78237.
75216.
People are fleeing.
There are more deaths in that zip code than in Iraq during the war.
We're on the front line of the war.
What are you doing out here tonight?
Working, trying to make my money to get my drugs.
When was the last time you shot up?
Yesterday in the morning.
They got 1 foot in and 1 foot out, and they're about to go the wrong way.
I made a decision in my life.
This is where everything happened at.
That I would join the Mexican cartel.
I committed a crime in 2007 and it's followed me here to 2014.
As the family goes,
he just hurt so bad.
So goes the community.
So it becomes a warlike environment
that results in chaos, violence, confusion, and poverty.
There's life hours down to a grind, man, and it's a hell of a grind. That's why you got to have people who remind those in this trap that it's not permanent. And that you have the ability to get out.
Nothing is more powerful or credible than a witness.
Redemption is being able to look at yourself, do some self-introspection, and say, where I go wrong at.
What is it that you are learning from your failures?
I don't want to be that person anymore. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to let people down.
What led to that choice that made me go wrong?
I thought a man was a hustler, a gangster, a man with kids by different women. That's what I thought a man was because I grew up without a father.
And then you got to spend the rest of your life correcting. If I knew stuff I knew now back then, I'd have went a whole different direction, man.
There is a role people must play in their own uplift.
If I have to come in here and tie shoestrings and water the plants, as long as I can get a paycheck, I'll do whatever it is I have to do.
But I put a tank in the back of the van, a pressure washer, and went around and started washing cars in the community.
Jasper's mobile car wash is taking off.
And today I stand here, the largest minority food service company here in the city.
We don't believe that folks can rise from the ashes.
Life may have knocked you down.
The judge said, you're a menace to society when he sentenced me.
But these are Phoenix.
You all are stories of hope. You can make a comeback from anything that's holding you down.
And now the men are winning. They're getting victory in their lives because they feel like they're somebody.
This thing right here changed my life.
This life now with him, I can't even describe.
I still believe that we have the capacity within our own nation to heal ourselves.
But you have to have solutions that work.
And the movement has to do with people.
If you're going to fight a war, you better recruit some soldiers.
The hood heroes are the heroes.
There are social enterprises led by grassroots organizations that are very close to the people who have need, which, if supported and empowered, can help people who otherwise would be stuck in poverty.
Hope keeps you going when you don't have product. See, it's nothing like being hopeful that you can make it, man. That gives you the ability to go places that you never thought you could go.
So the question is, what's a life worth to you? What's America worth?
What do you think is the answer to poverty? Well, let me show you what I saw.
From Opportunity Lives, you'll be hearing more about these videos and seeing some more trailers. But the compelling stories that are told are critical. It's important that we understand the issues in play. You saw Bob Woodson in that last video. The Center for Neighborhood Enterprise is an organization that Bob started a number of years ago, and Bob has been a friend of our family's, has worked with my dad for a long time. So we're thrilled for you all to be exposed to those videos, and you can go to Opportunity Lives to see more about them. I'm also really pleased that we have Arthur Brooks with us here today from the American Enterprise Institute. Arthur's a scholar, but he's more. He's also an author, a musician, a professor. He's president of the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C., and he's fostered a community of scholars and supporters who are committed to expanding liberty, increasing individual opportunity, and strengthening free enterprise. And I'll never forget what Arthur said at one of our Kemp Forum events. We were focusing just on the American idea. Arthur said, free enterprise matters because of the poor. Rich people don't need free enterprise very much, because rich people have the system pretty wired. If we are not warriors for the poor every single day, then free enterprise simply has no moral content, and it does not matter. And that's the heart of the American idea. Please welcome Arthur Brooks.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you to all of you. What an honor to be with you today.
Not on. Arthur, you got to start over.
I got to start over. You know, now the mic is on. Figures, right? It's so wonderful to see so many of you, and what an honor for me to be with you, to see my fellow warriors for the poor, the new right, looking out for our brothers and sisters in need. This is a new day for the Republican Party and for the conservative movement. Now, we're in need of a new day. May 22nd, 1964, by the way, one day after I was born, Lyndon B. Johnson gave his Great Society speech in which he effectively set out his plan to destroy American poverty. I am a child of the war on poverty. It's been 50 years. How have we done? Well, we've spent $20 trillion, and we've gone all the way from 15% of our brothers and sisters in poverty in America in 1964 to 14.7% of fellow Americans in poverty today. That's failure. That's failure that would get any American CEO fired 600 times over. Yet there's no accountability in America for that. Now, what's the price of that? I told you $20 trillion, but that doesn't matter. It's 3 generations of Americans lost in independency. Go back and read President Johnson's beautiful speech in the Great Society. He talks about dignity, not doles. He talks about lifting people up, not trapping them in dependency. He sounds like a conservative, but we haven't been able to live up to that. Last night, as I looked at the news, it occurred to me that the American government's greatest approach, most visible approach to wiping out poverty today is the Powerball lottery. It's not good enough. We have gone in 50 years to a tripling of the working age men in this country who are idle out of the workforce. A 9-fold increase in dependency on government programs. The cost of this is not financial. The cost of this is human, and it's moral. And we all have to be in this fight. Progressive, large government policies have failed the poor in this country, and they failed America. Now, I can tell you that too many Americans believe that those of us who are conservatives don't care. But I know some of you, and I can tell you personally that the reason I'm a conservative, as Jimmy Kemp just told you, is because poverty is what I care about the most. That's something we have to be in on together, because if we're not warriors on this, if our examination of conscience is not to make sure that all of our work goes for the benefit of people with less power than us, then we're not doing what we're supposed to do as Americans, and even less so as American conservatives in the movement. What an honor to be here to host this discussion with our presidential candidates and to be hosted by 2 of the most distinguished politicians in America today on the Hill in Washington who have dedicated their careers to the anti-poverty mission. You've just heard from my great friend, Senator Tim Scott, and now it's my honor to introduce the Speaker of the House, a man who truly is a warrior for the poor, a man who, behind the scenes, not in the forefront of his political career, has been visiting sites and people and getting to know the least of these, our brothers and sisters, in a very private way. He has put his credibility and his political power on the line for this issue, and it is my great honor now to introduce my friend, Speaker Paul Ryan.
Buddy. Appreciate it. Thanks for doing it. Good stuff. Thanks, man. Really appreciate it. Hey, everybody. How are you doing? Morning. This is great. So nice to see you. Good morning. One thing I wanted to add that Tim Scott forgot to ask. How many here are Wisconsin Badger fans? One person, great. She's wearing red. I wanted to take a few moments to explain why we are here today. First, though, I want to introduce some of my colleagues who traveled here who are from the House of Representatives. That's Congressman Mick Mulvaney, Congressman Tom Rice, and Congressman Joe Wilson. Thank you for being here with us today. We appreciate you guys attending us today. One of the reasons why I am here today is because Jack Kemp was my mentor. And there was no one more passionate about fighting poverty than Jack Kemp. So that's why I think it's so fitting that the host of this forum is a foundation that bears his name. He was passionate about the American idea. Well, we've been fighting a war on poverty for over 50 years now. And I don't think you can conclude anything other than this war has been a stalemate. 50 years, trillions of dollars. Yet today, if you were born poor, you are just as likely to end up in poverty as you were 50 years ago. We have 46 million people living in poverty today. I'm not saying no progress has been made. Yes, some progress has been made. But when you take a look at the war on poverty, I think there's a problem, and the problem has been our strategy. Most of the thinking about the war on poverty, has been the idea that it's about deprivation, about materialism. People just don't have enough money. And so for the past 50 years, the government has created 80 different programs. We've treated poverty like they're potholes that need to be filled up, and then move on. You have an empty wallet, you fill it, you move on. And so we've created all these programs for, education, energy, healthcare, you name it. And the catch is this. All of these programs stack up on top of each other with no coordination among them. And we now have a safety net that is designed to catch people falling into poverty, when what we really need is a safety net that is designed to help get people out of poverty. And so if you work a little bit, you lose a lot of benefits. And so we think we've been filling holes, but from the government standpoint, we've been actually building a trap. Make a little bit more, lose a ton, don't work. And so we need to rethink our approach. And this is where I think conservative principles are so sorely needed. This is where I think we can launch a conversation in this country about truly fixing this problem and opening up a renaissance. Stop measuring success in the war on poverty by measuring inputs, effort. How many programs are we creating? How much money are we spending? Measure success by outcomes, results. How many people are we actually getting out of poverty? Go after the root causes. Don't simply treat the symptoms. And what I know are two things. Number one, what I have learned, there are incredible people in this country doing this well, fighting poverty successfully. It's amazing. You will see some of it in these videos. I've learned from people just traveling the country that the ideas are out there, because poverty isn't just about deprivation, it's about isolation. Lots of different kinds of poverty, but we're isolating the poor. That's the one thing in common. So we have to stop reinforcing this notion, I pay my taxes, this is government's responsibility, they'll take care of it. That doesn't cut it anymore. We have to reintegrate the poor. Because if isolation is the problem, not just deprivation, that means people need a mentor. They need a job, a boss, a teacher, a friend, a community, a church, someone they trust, someone with credibility to help them get from where they are to where they need to be. The second thing I know is that the American idea is this most beautiful idea. We're the only country founded on an idea. The condition of your birth does not determine the outcome of your life. You work hard, you play by the rules, you can get ahead. You make a mistake in life, you can redeem yourself and build your life. That's the American idea. That's what Jack Kemp talked about. Here's the problem. If it is not true for everybody, and there are a lot of people who do not believe it's there for them, then it's really not true at all, is it? So our job is to figure out how to rebuild the American idea. Have a conversation, a competition. And what we're doing here today is starting that conversation. Talking to the people aspiring to be president about their ideas, bringing attention to this issue. So I want to thank you for being here today, and I want to welcome our candidates. First, I'd like to welcome my friend, your senator, Senator Tim Scott from South Carolina. And please join me in welcoming from Florida, Governor Jeb Bush, retired surgeon, Ben Carson, and from New Jersey, Governor Chris Christie. Hey, Paul. Hey, how you doing? Good to see you, man. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. Hey,
good to see
nice
you.
To meet you
All
in
right,
person.
you too. Absolutely. Thank you.
Hey, Paul. How you doing? Good to see you.
Buddy?
Thanks for doing it.
You guys
Let's do a quick photo thing, I guess.
Okay.
They told us to line up for a photograph.
Oh, good.
Nice crowd.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Kick it off. Well, hey, thanks for being here. We are looking forward to your comments and having a robust discussion about people as well as policies. Ben, why don't you kick us off this morning and talk about your experience in poverty and what makes this issue important to you?
Well, it's critically important to me because, you know, as a kid growing up in poverty, I hated poverty. You know, some people hate rats, some people hate roaches. I hated poverty. I was absolutely certain that I was born into the wrong family. But I'll tell you the thing that really changed it for me. You know, my mother, who had a much worse upbringing than I did, growing up in rural Tennessee, a huge family, got married when she was 13, trying to escape a desperate situation. They moved to Detroit. She discovered that my father was already married. He was a bigamist. And so now she had to raise us on her own. But she, for some reason, felt that education was the key. And as bad as her life was, she never felt sorry for herself. And that was a good thing. The problem is she never felt sorry for us either. So there was never any excuse that could be made. And she prayed for wisdom, and God gave her the wisdom, in her opinion, not in ours, to turn off the TV and make us read books. And as I was reading about people, I started reading about people of great accomplishment, scientists and explorers and philosophers. And one thing I began to notice is that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. It's not the environment. And you know, once I understood that, poverty didn't bother me anymore, because I knew I had the ability to change it myself. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't need to help each other escape from it. No question about that. And it's one of the reasons that, you know, my wife and I put these reading rooms all over the country, particularly in Title I schools, where a lot of kids come from homes with no books. They go to a school with no library or a poorly funded library. And these reading rooms are places that no kid could pass up. And they get points for the number of books they read, and they can trade them in for prizes. In the beginning, they do it for the prizes. But it doesn't take long before that shows up in their academic performance, puts them on a different trajectory, because 70 to 80% of high school dropouts are functionally illiterate. If we change that downstream, we have a profound effect upstream.
Excellent.
Yeah. Governor Bush, let me ask you, I learned from my mentor, Jack Kemp, and from my other mentor, Bob Woodson, who we are hear from later today, that the only way to really know poverty is to try and walk it through people's footsteps, to learn from people struggling. You were the governor of Florida, a big, diverse state with lots of issues and challenges, and this is an issue you took on. How did you come into understanding this issue? How did you come in? What touched you to give you an appreciation for the problem of poverty?
Well, Paul, excuse me, Mr. Speaker.
Paul's good. Jeb?
I haven't seen him since he's become Speaker. Congratulations.
Thanks.
The country's better off that you're the Speaker of the... So we share a common bond, I think, inspired by Jack Kemp in the political realm, and meeting Bob Woodson, not as a governor, but as a person seeking knowledge and seeking truth. In the 1990s, I became sensitized to the fact that poverty is a lot more complex than what the smart people in Washington describe it as. It's not just economic. There are all sorts of limits to people's aspirations, and how you deal with it is important. Compassion is not measured by how much money you spend through Washington, through a big administrative bureaucracy, and send it back down to other bureaucrats filling out forms to eventually get back into a community. Compassion is, in the Greek sense, is acting on your sense of consciousness. And the only way we're going to become a more just society is from the bottom up, where people act on their sense of consciousness together to give people a chance to rise up. And that was just, in all sorts of ways, I learned that. One of the ways I did it, Paul, was in 1997, I set up the first one of the first 4 charter schools in the state of Florida. The law was passed in 1996. The foundation I was a part of helped lobby for that. And then with the Urban League of Greater Miami, I set up the Liberty City Charter School. And it was a phenomenal experience because this little school of 90 kids, K-3, just outside of Liberty City, we basically got the parents to create the culture of the school. What they wanted were kids with uniforms. They wanted to have a contract where every parent had to commit to a certain number of hours. They voluntarily wanted to see this happen. We had to fight the school district because they wanted corporal punishment. The school district thought, oh my God, no, you can't do that. Well, we actually, we got it. We got it done in a way that made sense because they wanted discipline, they wanted respect for the teachers, they wanted to be engaged, and it was an incredible experience. I'll never forget on the opening of the school, we were mopping the school and we were getting it all ready, and on a Saturday, we walked out about 5 o'clock, all the volunteers, and we didn't have a flagpole outside the school. So I learned how to set cement on Sunday with some friends, and on Monday morning when the school started, 90 kids outside in uniforms were saying the Pledge of Allegiance. It was a phenomenal experience for me. And I think it's important for all of us not to look at this just from a policy point of view. I'm a wonk. I mean, I believe in policy. I believe in ideas. I've unveiled a pretty detailed, serious plan as it relates to welfare reform. But more importantly, I think it's important to act on your sense of consciousness. Everybody should have the right to rise up in this country. No one should have limits on their aspirations. When we become a society, if you're born poor, you're stuck, and if you're wealthy, you're going to stay there, that's a society that will be in decline.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Governor Christie, so often the states are referred to as the laboratories of democracy. I know that you've had a lot of success reading through your website on making sure that work is a part of the answer. Can you talk to us about what you think the answers are for us from a federal perspective, and let's dispel the notion that the federal government has all the answers to poverty?
Well, I think the conduct of the federal government has already dispelled that. So I don't think we need to worry about dispelling that too much, Tim. I mean, I think, most people in the world are looking at our federal government, understanding that they can't even do the basic things right, let alone letting them try to get into things that are even more complex and further down the line. But, in reaction to what Ben said, the first time I've learned about poverty was from both my parents. My mom was the product of a single mother, and she's the oldest child in that family. My grandfather was gone, and my grandmother, had to take 3 buses every day to go to work, and my mother had to raise her 2 younger siblings. And they were abjectly poor, to the point where my grandmother would, for Christmas, recycle the gift that she had given them the year before, take it, rewrap it, and send it. They had nothing. My father, the same way. His father died of cancer when my dad was 15 years old, and left my grandmother. And in those days, there were not some of the supports that are available today. And both my grandmothers, were really left to go out and work, and the kids to go out and work to just keep a roof over their heads. And so both my parents brought that sensitivity to our family. That's the way they've been raised, and the way they taught us to think about things. And it's very much the same way Ben said. My dad was the first one in his family to go to college. And so he went at night while he was working at the Breyers ice cream plant in Newark during the day, and would go at night on the GI Bill because he had served in the Army, because that was his only option when he graduated from high school. When your parents bring those sensitivities to you, no matter how much success they ultimately had, and my parents had some good success, my father did. My mom stayed at home with us and raised us until she started to work when we were teenagers to help support the family. It helps you to understand everything that you see as a governor. You can see a reflection of yourself. And if you got to where you got to as governor, you want to try to make sure that you can do everything you can to give those young people an opportunity to achieve whatever they want to achieve, whatever their dream is, whether it's to be a governor, be a neurosurgeon, be an entrepreneur, whatever it is your dream is to do. And so I think that the function of the states is to say, let's look at our individual communities. We get a chance to do that in a way the federal government just can't. It's too big, right? So I can go and say that The thing that we're doing in Camden, for instance, is setting up not only charter schools, but Renaissance schools. We've changed the police force to make it safer there. And you can see now, just this week, Camden announced for now the second year in a row since we've made these changes, their high school graduation rate has increased. Well, that then helps to produce what Ben's talking about in his answer, which is if those kids are now graduating from high school, now they have a chance to achieve things educationally that they would never have had a chance to achieve before in Camden. But that's not the same solution for the city of Newark. Bigger city, more complex, more difficult. We have to get in there with different tools in Newark, but the state has the ability to pick and choose based upon the merits of what's going on. If you leave this to the federal government, they just cannot, they swing a meat axe rather than a scalpel on these issues. And I think one of the things that Jeb and I, I'm sure, certainly learned as governors is that we have the ability to really get in there and be able to pick and choose the right type of tools to use depending upon the challenge in the city. And I think that's why the federal government should be empowering the states much more than they are to make these choices. This president doesn't trust us. And it's not just me or Jeb or Scott Walker or anybody else he doesn't trust. He doesn't even trust Democratic governors to make these choices. He wants to make the choices. And that's a mistake. And it's not helping those who we're looking to lift up.
Ben, if we gave out trophies to people who fought against all odds and led by example and showed us how to beat poverty, you would win the Lombardi Trophy, which is the greatest trophy of all football.
Really?
Yeah, yes, it is.
Glad to see your objectivity is right out there, Paul.
Exactly. Right. You did it. I mean, you are a beautiful example of overcoming adversity and odds. Now you're in this area where you're aspiring to be our president. So looking at the federal government, what is it that the federal government is doing that is hurting or putting barriers in front of more Ben Carsons of America? What, if you were the president, do you think you should go at right away to remove some of those barriers that may exist to prevent more Ben Carsons from materializing tomorrow?
Yeah. Well, I'm not one of those people who thinks that the federal government is completely bad, just mostly. But, you know, it really kind of started in the 20s with the Wilson administration sort of insinuating itself into everybody's lives. And it accelerated by the time we got to the 60s, LBJ, you know, the government saying, we, the government, are going to eliminate poverty, the war on poverty, this new great society. Well, how did that work? You know, $19 trillion later, we have 10 times more people on food stamps, more poverty, welfare, broken homes, out-of-wedlock births, crime, incarceration. Everything is not only worse, it's much worse. Now, that's not to say that the government is evil. It's just saying that sometimes they overstep their boundaries in terms of what they think they should do. And maybe they should read the Constitution. I think that would probably be helpful. Maybe, you know, I think maybe they did read the Constitution. They read the preamble, and it talks about the duties of government, and it says to promote the general welfare. They probably thought that meant put everybody on welfare. But that's obviously, it means to create the right kind of atmosphere for people. And I believe that the real answer to poverty is not government, but the private sector. And that's the reason that, you know, I've indicated that, you know, one of the ways to jumpstart the private sector is to look at that more than $2.1 trillion that's overseas in terms of corporate money that's not being brought back because we have the highest corporate tax rates in the developed world. That is absolute craziness. And what I would suggest is a 6-month hiatus to allow that money to be repatriated with no taxes whatsoever. And in the process, just requiring that 10% of it be used in enterprise zones and to create jobs for people who are unemployed and on welfare. You want to talk about a stimulus. That would be the biggest stimulus since FDR's New Deal, and it wouldn't cost the taxpayers 1 penny. And that's low-hanging fruit. That's the kind of thing that we can do. And what happens is now the businesses, the corporations are starting to think once again about how do we invest in the people around us. We need to get business, industry, academia, Wall Street, churches, community groups, all involved in creating the right kind of atmosphere and helping people around them. You know, I've been involved with a lot of nonprofits, and particularly, Right to Life organizations, who create these homes and atmospheres for women who've gotten pregnant. Because when a woman gets pregnant out of wedlock, particularly in the inner city, her education usually ends. That's the end of it right there. And that child is 4 times as likely to grow up in poverty and end up in the welfare system or the penal system, which is hurting us as a society. But they help that woman. They provide child care for her so that she can get her GED, she can get her associate's degree, she can get her bachelor's degree, she can learn to take care of herself, she can teach her child to take care of herself. That's how you break cycles of poverty. But that's done by us, that's not done by the government. And you can put people in those places, if they're not government organizations, who can teach and tell that young woman that you are worth something, that you don't have to give yourself away to the first guy who comes along talking about you have pretty eyes. And, that Jesus Christ died for you and that you're a worthy individual. You don't get to hear that when it's a government organization. Those are the kinds of things that will help us to build the fabric of our society once again. It's our duty. We are our brother's keepers.
Jeb, in the last couple of days, you rolled out a new plan on expanding opportunities. You want to dive into that a little bit and talk about the main points of your plan?
Sure. First, I think what we ought to do is to not just talk about the laboratories of democracy, but mean it, do it. Create outcome measurements from the federal government, but don't create any kind of restrictions on how states go about dealing with this great challenge of the lack of upward mobility. Where people are stuck. They're stuck in poverty. And the notion of some that somehow they want to be there is just totally ridiculous. It is totally wrong. In fact, we'll never win elections if we send any kind of signal like that. We'll become a minority party. And I know people in this room don't believe that. So if you started with the premise that the states, if they got the chance to do it in their own unique ways, as Chris says, each community might have a different approach to this, block grant the 3 big programs, the TANF program, the food stamp program, and the housing assistance program to states. The state-federal relationship would be focused on outcomes. How many people are getting out of poverty, not how many people are staying in poverty. Right now, in effect, you measure the poverty programs by how many people are on the rolls, and they grow. And that's a measurement of success, sadly. We've got to turn that around. Secondly, we need to have one income eligibility requirement. Look, when I travel around, I see a lot of people who aren't receiving government assistance, but they're 1 paycheck away from a real disaster, or 2. In fact, a majority of Americans are 2 paychecks away from having a life-altering kind of circumstance. They're struggling. They're working as hard as they can. They may be working 2 jobs. They may be an intact family or not. It doesn't matter. The simple fact is there should be equity between people receiving government assistance and those that are striving to live an independent life. And so work needs to be the single biggest requirement. No more waivers, as this administration has done. There should be real work eligibility. And that means we have to transform our education and training programs, because right now we have a skills gap. It's great to give people a chance to get a job, but if they don't have the skills to get a job, then that's the first step. And all of our workforce programs, I think, need to be revamped, and certainly our education systems as well. Imagine a system where you were starting from scratch, not the one we have today. If you had the same amount of money, but if you could deliver these programs to help people get out of poverty in a different way. You would reward marriage, not penalize it. You would reward work, so that as you worked, you wouldn't have a marginal tax rate effectively that is the highest of any tax bracket. And you would promote in a dramatically different fashion education, so that more and more of our young people were college and or career ready, because only about 1/3 of them are. It's shameful. and training programs so that you customize it so people have the skills to be able to pursue their dreams. Those three things plus strong communities, which Bob Woodson and Paul Ryan have talked about eloquently in their works in the last years, that's what we need to do. Shift all of this back to communities and allow those four pillars for a successful, upwardly mobile society to take hold. Radically different education system, a focus on work, a focus on marriage because that is important, and then having an education system that allows people to rise up. We can make this happen, particularly when we have a president that's committed to it, because the good news, unfortunately, is that the old way has failed. It's easier to make this case, I think, because the systems now, people know it. People know that this has failed. Look at the number of people that are completely dependent upon government today and have no hope. They cannot live lives of purpose and meaning, and they're creating strains for their families and themselves that is unjustified to live in this great country of ours.
Chris, work is something we're going to hear, I think, a lot. You made work supports an important part of your agenda as New Jersey governor. For instance, you increased your state earned income tax credit. You focus on the Work First programs. Tell us, what did you see from these reforms? How have you been able to measure those successes? And how would you try to translate that policy at the federal level?
Yeah, well, we doubled the earned income tax credit in New Jersey. And the reason we did it is because we have to do more than just talk about work. We have to really reward the people who are out there doing it. And as the economy in New Jersey got better and more jobs were available, especially in the private sector, we wanted to continue to encourage people to make that transition that Jeb was talking about in his answer, that if you give people this kind of Hobson's choice of I can make more by sitting at home on the couch than I could if I go to work. Yeah. I mean, that's what a lot of people are facing right now. And I had individual citizens in my state say to me, you know, I don't make any sense for me and my family. If I went and took a job, I'd actually make less than I'm making right now when you put all the programs together that they were receiving. So doubling the earned income tax credit, I think, was one of our answers to that.
Now, how does increasing the EITC help address that specifically? I don't think everybody knows that.
Sure. Well, it is essentially a refundable tax credit, meaning that when you go to work, even if you're not paying income taxes in New Jersey because your threshold is too low to pay, we're going to give you a check back based upon the fact that you are earning your income. And you're going to get a check that helps to supplement your income from the government. But it's based upon the fact that you're working. You're earning your income. Because the gap that exists, and I hear people complain about this all the time, but don't necessarily articulate it completely. They say, well, people are on their couches and they're not working and we've got to change the system. You're right, except that for some of those folks, they're confronted with the ugly truth that if they did get off their couch and went to work, they'd make less.
That's the key of the EITC, right? It
Exactly.
actually makes work pay.
Right.
Because in some cases, without it, a person will actually lose benefits, lose materially if they go take the job, and the EITC helps reduce that problem. Is that basically
That's exactly right, and that's why doubling the EITC made so much sense in our state. And remember, our state is a very high-cost state as well. In the New York, New Jersey metropolitan area, it is a high-cost state to live in. Everything is a bit more expensive than it is in other parts of the country. So, to be able to do that, this gap grows even wider in a state like mine. One of the things that we didn't talk about, too, that I think is a barrier to this that we have to address that the federal government, I think, is doing the wrong way, is dealing with drug addiction. Because drug addiction is a huge part of this debilitating cycle, is that when folks lose hope, as Jeb talked about in his answer, a lot of them turn out of desperation to drugs. And then what we have is a situation where incarceration goes even higher. Because of the policies of the federal government right now, incarceration goes higher. And so that's why in New Jersey, one of the things that we did was I advocated for and signed a law that said if you're a first-time, nonviolent, non-dealing drug offender, you don't go to prison anymore. You go to mandatory inpatient drug treatment because this is a disease. And if we continue to treat it as a way that where if you're not a violent person, you're not dealing this poison in our neighborhoods and making a profit off it, you're an addict. If we're putting those people in jail and then we're not giving them treatment, and then we release them from jail. And we wonder why they continue to go back to crime, don't get a job, don't support their families, don't play a role in raising their children. Well, of course they don't, because they're suffering from a disease that doesn't permit them to do any of that. And so I believe the federal government has to change its policies towards this. It has not worked. It was a noble try. It's been 30 years or so of a war on drugs that has been focused on incarceration and enforcement. There are always going to be jail cells, if I'm president, for folks who are dealing drugs and committing violent acts. There'll always be jail cells for them. But we need to get some of the people who are just addicts and diseased out of those jail cells, give them treatment, because you can't get to work if you can't get out of bed in the morning. You can't get to work if you're high on heroin or cocaine. No one's going to hire you. And so it's one of those barriers, when you talk about the barriers, and our policies in the federal government are doing nothing to deal with the real problem that we have, which is people can be treated. This is a disease. We can make people better. And when we do that, we do what Ben was talking about, which is to rebuild families. When a father or a mother, a son or a daughter, a sister or a brother comes back into a family healthy, you can't calculate the positive effect that has on a family and a community. And we need to do more of that, and that's one of the barriers to getting out of poverty that people don't talk about as much, but we need to talk about more and empower the states to treat people, not incarcerate people.
Paul, can I add?
Yeah.
It's an important point. 50% of in our federal system, 50% of the people incarcerated are there for drug-related offenses, not the dealing, but the use. 50%. Now, and I don't know what it is in New Jersey and Florida, I think it's like 20%. I think there needs to be reform, sentencing guideline reform in the federal government. This is a place where conservatives and the president agree. The president's impulse, though, is to use the clemency process rather than engage with the speaker and the majority leader to deal with something I think there's broad consensus on. The other thing that's important is also to give people second chances. If you believe that marriage is important in this, and it is, and if you believe that work's important, then if you have a record, you can't get a job. And you're not going to be, and increasingly men are becoming obsolete in lower income communities, and we need to make sure that they're empowered to be able to do their job. So I think withholding adjudication as part of the element of getting drug treatment is a key element of this, that if you're on the road to recovery, your crime, whatever it was, would be wiped out, so that and the employment reforms that some of the large corporations are looking at, or other elements. We need to make sure that people can have access to the opportunities that exist, because right now they're kind of pushed aside. The other thing on the earned income tax credit, if you're 21 to 25, a single filer, you can't get it. And I think that's another place where the first rung of the ladder needs to be focused on. Our proposal includes the earned income tax credit for them and doubling it for all single filers. Back to this notion that you just got to get men engaged in the workforce again, because you cannot have a society where they're obsolete. We see it play out. We see the criminal justice system be overwhelmed. And this is a place, I think, where there's common ground on left and right, and I hope you guys find ways to actually get the president to do his job.
Right, absolutely. I'm going to quick response on I think there's a common misperception that the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, is part of welfare or is welfare. It's actually not. It's an old Milton Friedman idea that he came up with called negative income tax, which is sort of the anti-welfare. The problem at the federal level is there's so much fraud in the program.
Yeah.
So we have to get better tools to go after the fraud, and we have to make it more of something that you see in your paycheck, that you see, because at the federal level, it's a lump sum at the end of the year. So you don't see the feel of, oh, this makes sense to work. I am not losing by going and taking this job. So I think there's a lot of reform at the federal level that can get it back to this great conservative idea, which is work pays, welfare is temporary, and I want to get myself up and out of.
And Paul, one of the things we did in New Jersey as a part of the deal of doubling the EITC was to empower the state treasurer to do a significant fraud investigation on the EITC program in New Jersey. And we eliminated a good amount of the fraud and made examples of some of those folks who were doing it. That helps to reinforce everybody's confidence in the program. So part of the deal that we made with the Democratic legislature was, we will agree to double the EITC, but you need to agree to empower the state treasurer to make sure that they can conduct the kind of investigations that gives the public credit and confidence credit for the fact that they're willing to step up and help folks move up and credit work, but also confidence that we're not just throwing the money in the fireplace, which is not
a lot better than minimum wage raising.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Certainly strengthens the notion that we should be able to put more of the focus on the states as opposed to the federal government, because your accuracy is far better than the federal government. Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and it may not be a very popular thing to say, but, earned income tax credits, any kind of manipulation of the tax system, for whatever good reason, I just generally don't agree with. I think we need to make the income tax system very simple and extremely fair and stop having all these different variations, because what those things do is they create bureaucracies and the need for this agency, and it just feeds the system. The system is already too big. We have 4.1 million federal employees. We have 645 federal agencies and sub-agencies, and we can keep finding reasons to do more things. I think the way that we handle the situation is begin to teach the populace that if you can stay at home and get government subsidies, or you get a minimum wage job and you see that you get maybe a little bit more from staying at home, let's teach those people that when they go to work, they get skills, they meet people, they get opportunities, they get to climb the ladder, they get much better off than the person who's just sitting at home receiving those things. That's the can-do attitude that made America great, not the what can you do attitude that is taking us down.
Yeah, well, I'm all for the president of the United States making those statements and encouraging work and making work something that's more than just a paycheck that you get, but the intrinsic value for the soul that work brings to you every day. But the practical fact of the matter is, when you actually look at the way these programs work and are responsible for administering them, is that people are not making that choice. And a president's rhetoric is not going to make it so that somebody is going to lose their apartment because they go off support to go and take a minimum wage job. That person's not going to make that decision. No matter how much the president tells them that there's value in work and you can go up the ladder, and they say, yeah, but I'm losing my apartment. So I'm not going to do that because I'm not going to put my children on the street. So we need to be practical about, and Jeb said this before, if we were starting from the beginning and we had nothing underneath us and no history, we could do things a lot differently. But we have to be practical about this in this respect. If we're going to say we're not going to give people that choice and we're just going to speak to them about it to try to convince them, then the problem becomes they're not going to make a choice. And we're not going to change what's happening in this country. And so I'm not saying that every one of these programs, whether it's EITC or others, are perfect. EITC doesn't create any more bureaucracy. EITC is embedded in what is already in our tax code and our tax system in New Jersey. The bigger problem is we've got to figure out a way to reverse what this president has done over the last 7 years, which is to make people more comfortable with dependence. That's right. We need to let them have the reason to get off of that dependence and not have to give up their home and put their children on the street in return for that.
So the poverty, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Ben, let's stay on the topic of taxes for a little while. You talked about repatriation, the ability to bring home $2 trillion, creates millions of jobs, I'm sure. You think about repatriation, you add on top of that the fact that corporate inversions have been happening at the fastest pace we've seen in recent history. One of the ways that we can impact that corporate inversions, from my perspective, is not trying to penalize those companies that are trying to leave, but lower the tax rate.
Correct.
You've come out recently with a plan to do that. Why don't you talk about that plan?
Yeah, well, why does Congress have the ability to impose taxes? Let's go back to history, and we see the reason was to be able to run the government. It wasn't to affect people's behavior and do the multitude of things that have resulted in a 75 to 80,000 page tax code. And we need to get back to the basics. I want a completely flat tax. Everybody pays exactly the same rate. And I base that, and some people like to ridicule me, but I base it on the Bible, on tithing. I think God's a pretty fair guy. And, he didn't say, if you have a bumper crop, you owe me triple tithe. And he didn't say if your crops fail, you don't owe me anything. So everybody needs to have skin in the game. You know, we are compassionate at the 150% poverty level. It's where the 14.9% tax kicks in. Below that, you still have to pay a de minimis tax. Because everybody has to have skin in the game, and it doesn't make any sense to me for half the people not to pay any taxes but have a say on how much the others paid. You know, I want, you know, complete fairness in the system, but also no deductions and no loopholes whatsoever, because people will always manipulate everything to find a way to take advantage of the loophole. Now, some people say it's not fair. Let's say for simplicity's sake, you have a 10% tax. And the guy who makes $10 billion pays $1 billion. The guy who makes $10 pays $1. They say that's not fair because the guy who paid $1 billion, he's still got $9 billion left. We got to take more of his money. Well, that's called socialism. That doesn't work in America as far as I'm concerned. We don't want that. And then there are those who say, yeah, but my mortgage deduction, I'll lose my house. They're not thinking this through. You're going to have a lot more money, so you don't need the mortgage deduction. And then there'll be those who say the churches will all disappear because, you know, there won't be any reason for people to give. Newsflash. Before 1913, when the federal income tax was imposed, there were lots of churches. There were lots of charities all over our country because the American people are the most generous and charitable people on the face of the earth. And we don't need an incentive like that in order to be charitable to our fellow man. You know, you think about what happened as this country was growing and developing. Communities separated by hundreds of miles. Why were they able to grow and thrive? Because people cared about each other. If it was harvest time and a farmer was in a tree picking apples and he fell out and broke his leg, everybody else pitched in and harvested his crops. If somebody got killed by a grizzly bear, everybody took care of his family. That's how we used to be as a society. We used to care about each other. We have to reject all these purveyors of hatred who are trying to create division amongst us and make us think there's a war on women and race wars and income wars and age wars and religious wars. What a bunch of crap. You know, our strength.
I'll go to Jed then.
Our strength lies in our unity and in our compassion, and we are Americans and we take care of each other. And when we learn that, we will also have policies that are fair, that won't pick and choose winners and losers. And, you know, that is the basis of the tax programs that I came up with.
I just want to follow up on the grizzly bears.
Yeah. What's that?
I just want to follow up on the grizzly bears.
Grizzly bears, okay.
Yeah, I think one thing that we have accomplished in this society is we have dramatically reduced death by grizzly bears. That's success. We're winning the war. So there's a big macro point we're talking about, which is the poverty trap. It's disincentivizing people from going, you know, from welfare to work to building their lives. And, you know, if you look at the marginal tax rates, we're talking about the tax code, the highest tax rate payer isn't Aaron Rodgers and Warren Buffett. It is the single mom with 2 kids earning, you know, $20,000 to $30,000 who wants to go to work, who loses about 80 cents on the dollar if she makes that next step because of the way the poverty trap is designed. So we've got to figure out how to ease that, how to reduce those barriers. But even if we do that, there's a human component to this. Even if we get the economics and the numbers and the math figured out, there's this human component. And Jeb, I wanted to ask you to touch on that. You mentioned corporal punishment at the Liberty Charter School. I didn't
participate, just for the record. I want to make sure.
Didn't participate.
There's some friends in the press back there.
And we're not endorsing corporal punishment. You know.
No, I actually, you know what?
My mother did, though. She believed in the switch. I'm not sure about y'all, but
I think all of our moms might have endorsed it.
I went to Catholic grade school, junior high. I had nuns as for most of my teachers. I learned this. It also developed within me a healthy fear of nuns. But learned lots of lessons, lots of skills. We're talking about drug addiction. There are amazing stories out there. If you go to San Antonio and visit with Pastor Jubal Garcia and look at his program, Outcry in the Barrio, which they have dozens around America, they're going out and ministering to drug addicts, particularly heroin, getting them off the street, getting them in their program, living with them for months at a time and turning them around, and the recidivism rates are just plummeting. And that's heroin, which if you do it twice, you're hooked. So there are these great stories of people actually succeeding and achieving. So we get the macro right, the math and the economics right, but it's that person-to-person touch. It's the people fighting poverty eye to eye, soul to soul, using passion, using community, church, religion. Jeb, you did this in the education component. How do you do that? How do you do that at the federal government? How do you get the federal government to respect people, to respect federalism, but to make those kind of connections flourish? We see these things in spite of the barriers, in spite of the arrogance of Washington. How do you change that so we have more of that human interaction? How do you get these groups to flourish?
Well, just like a lot of things in the federal government, scale is about the only way you can access it. You got to hire lobbyists. You know, you gotta have constituencies. You come to the Congress or you come to the bureaucracies with scale, and you become the incumbent, and then you spend your energy protecting your franchise, across, not just on social service programs, but across the spectrum. That's kind of how it works. And the startups, the disruptors in the social service arena, the social service entrepreneurs have no chance.
Yeah.
They have no chance because they can't fill out all the godforsaken forms, and they can't have auditors. I mean, they don't have. I mean, if you go to these organizations, these are people that have a spark, they're focused. This is defining themselves. This is how they define themselves. They're not doing this because it's a business or an agency, or that they're clients, or all these terminologies that the modern bureaucratic social service industry talks. They don't talk that way. They talk about acting on their heart and helping people, saving them in ways that is inspiring, and they have no access. I think the better way to do this is to shift as much power away from Washington, D.C. I am totally convinced, whether it's our Medicaid program, education programs, job training, all of these social service programs, if we could start anew and create outcome-based measurements, that we would have a much more flourishing social service sector where people in the communities could be able to access some of these monies. The other thing that I would think is important is when my brother became president, he set up the faith-based initiative, and it was successful. It was really successful, I think, and it did mobilize a lot of focus of tearing down barriers to get some of the more grassroots organizations to get involved. It's become different now. It exists, but it's not the same. And I think restoring kind of the bottom-up approach as it relates to faith and community-based organizations to create a place where they can ease their access into some of the monies would be important as well.
Chris, the person who introduced me today was Anita Zucker, who is a fabulous woman who was, at one point when she was a young adult, living in a trailer in Florida. As she moved to South Carolina, and now she's a billionaire, so everybody needs to move to South Carolina. Perhaps not my point, but the point is that...
Yeah, that is your point. All politics is local, Tim.
Exactly. Let me get to a question, however. Yeah. The fact is that her success, as listening to her over the last 25 years, entrepreneurship, the ability to create and to innovate is so powerful for those of us who have been mired in poverty, looking for a way out. We look for access to credit, access to capital. And today, the regulatory environment that's been created through Dodd-Frank makes stories like Anita Zucker's and mine far more difficult, because there is an absolute gorilla standing on the chest of would-be entrepreneurs. And if you look at the poorest communities throughout the country, they lack entrepreneurs. How do we fix that?
Yeah, well, I see this every day as a governor, because we're seeing across our state, since Dodd-Frank was put into place, closing of community and state-chartered banks all over. They're either closing completely or they're merging into the much bigger banks because they simply can't keep up with the regulatory requirements, and they're afraid. They're afraid now that if they make a loan, if they take a risk that doesn't go well, that the regulators are going to come in and fine them, penalize them, audit them, and bankrupt them with hiring accountants and auditors and lawyers to try to defend them against the federal government. And so, what they did in Dodd-Frank, again, it's kind of what I said before, it's the federal government sees a problem, they react emotionally because they want to get on TV, and then they take a meat axe to something that they don't even begin to understand or care, quite frankly, what the collateral damage is going to be. The collateral damage has been to entrepreneurs like you're talking about, to businesses that have already started, that are in little communities all over this country who say they're having some success. And so they want to hire some more employees. They want to open up a second shop. And they need credit. They're not going to Citibank or JP Morgan or Wells Fargo to get it. They're not going to, the loans are not big enough and they're not stable enough to be able to get those places to give them the money. This is when you go to the guy or woman down the street who runs the community bank, who knows you, who frequents your shop. They like what you do, and they're willing to take a risk on you. That's the way it used to be. But the way it is now, because the federal government got involved in this, is that community banker, more times than not, if they're still there, they say to the entrepreneur, listen, I'd love to help you, but I got these auditors and these new regulations and these new requirements, and you just don't meet all of them. So I wish you the best of luck. I mean, this is one of those either cynical and understood collateral damages that happened from Dodd-Frank, or the fact that they just didn't even read the bill, probably, for many of them who voted for it, and didn't understand what it was going to do. And so as president, I think the next president has to look at this and say, listen, for these big banks, these too big to fail banks that have, hundreds of billions of dollars in assets, they can comply with some of this regulation. And they, by the way, were the ones who created the problem in 2008, along with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, that really crippled our economy. But not the small. This wasn't, a small community bank in Florida or New Jersey that created the economic crisis. But they're creating a different kind of crisis now, which is unavailability for capital for people who are trying to take a great idea and turn it into a great business.
Absolutely.
Yep. Chris is absolutely right. There's an element that's becoming more talked about now in the political square, and it's a serious issue, which is you can't be an entrepreneur if you're in a community that has increasing crime rates. You can't get insurance, you can't start your business, people don't have confidence, and we're seeing increases in crime in the urban core areas of some of the big cities that is deeply disturbing. And I think that we need to have a conversation nationally about how do we support local law enforcement so that they can get back to community policing, because 99.99% of the time, they're protecting innocent people who feel threatened by the gangsters and by the criminals in these communities that exist. And you cannot create an environment where people are going to create jobs in the communities where unemployment rates are really high, where you have permanent dependency on government, unless you create safe streets. Yeah.
So Ben, we've got two governors who've obviously been very involved in education policy in their states, and they've taken a leading role. You're an education success story in your own right. How do you, at the federal level, fix this problem so that, as you described and as your mom drilled into you, you get people a good education? What do you think we ought to do at the federal level to respect this problem and to treat this problem? And in many ways, it's devolution and federalism, but go beyond that.
Sure. Well, before I answer that, let me just briefly say something about regulations that I think most people don't recognize, and that all of these federal regulations come with a price, and they cost us in terms of goods and services, and it's the most regressive tax there is, because everybody has to pay it. So when you go into the store to buy a box of detergent and it's gone up 10 cents because of regulations, who does that hurt? Not the rich person. The poor person notices that right away. The middle-class person maybe notices when they get to the cash register and everything's gone up a little bit, and they just don't feel good about it. So in addition to stifling the innovation and entrepreneurship, it is actually hurting the middle class and the poor people in our country immeasurably. And you have people like Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton who will say it's the fault of the rich. It's not the fault of the rich. It's the fault of the government who continues to pile these regulations on us, which we all have to pay for. Now, in terms of educational policy and the government, the best education we have found, and I like to base things on evidence and not on ideology. People who are best educated, homeschoolers. Next best are going to be private schoolers, and then charter schoolers, and then public schoolers. Now, that's not to say that all public schools are bad. Some are outstanding, but we have so many that are not. And I think the only way to solve this problem is to provide school choice. And I think school choice is done through vouchers that are mediated through the states and not through the federal government. The closer to home, the better it's going to be, and that way the voters in that state have something to say about it. That's one of the problems that we've seen as a society, that we've began to do more and more centralization. And when you centralize things, you take away the ability of the populace. And this country is supposed to be of, for, and by the people. And that's why I think almost, or at least a very large number of federal programs need to be block granted back to the states at 80%, and that saves us money at the federal level. And we tell the states, if you can administer this program and it costs you less than the amount that's been block granted, you can use the rest of it for whatever you want to. And that's going to really incentivize them to be efficient, but it's also going to make the people pay attention to what's going on. And that is especially true in education. And let me just say, a lot of people say in the inner cities, why are 50% of those kids dropping out of high school? Which of course is a disaster for us as a nation. Well, those kids are observant. And they look around and they say, I'm not getting educated anyway. I may as well be out there. Those are situations that we have to avoid. We only have 330 million people. We have to compete with China with 1.4 billion, India with 1.1 billion. We have to develop all of our people. And for every one of those kids we can keep from going down that path of self-destruction, that's one less person we have to be afraid of, protect our families from. One less person we have to pay for in the penal system or the welfare system, one more tax-paying, productive member of society who may discover a new energy source or the cure for cancer. We can't afford to throw any of our people away.
Yep. Paul, the other thing that we got to recognize, there's a huge political element to this too. The single most destructive force for public education in this country is the teachers' union. It is the single most destructive force. I will tell you what happened in my state. We got a lot of reforms done. We reformed teacher tenure in New Jersey between 2010 and 2013. We set up a public school choice program. We increased our charters to the largest number we've had in the history of New Jersey. And here's what happened. It was incredibly popular with people, and people really enjoyed it. And the teachers union felt incredibly threatened. And so what did they do? They gave $20 million to the legislative Democrats in my state in the year that I was running for re-election, because they were concerned that I was going to win by so much that they might lose the legislature. They gave them $20 million. The day after, I was re-elected with 61% of the vote, and we made no gains in the state legislature because of that $20 million that was spent on behalf of legislative Democrats. The legislative leaders came in to me, the Democrats, and said to me, listen, by the way, just so you know, congratulations, great win, no more education reform for your second term. We took the money from them, and the promise was we wouldn't do anything else. In New Jersey alone, the teachers union has 200,000 members, and they collect mandatory dues of $730 per person per year. That's $140 million that the teachers union just in New Jersey collects a year, and they pay nothing toward teacher salary, teacher pension, or teacher health care. It's a $140 million political slush fund to be able to reward their friends and to punish their enemies. Now imagine that kind of force And it's replicated in state after state after state in this country. Yet we have all kinds of people, wealthy people in this country who are for school choice, for all the things that Ben just talked about. And what do they pay for? They pay for another white paper that tells us what Ben just told us, right? I said to a group of these wealthy folks that I went and spoke to this past summer, stop paying for white papers, okay? Get your hands dirty and start paying for people in public office who will support the positions that you've got. Because right now the teachers union is absolutely a subsidiary of the Democratic Party, and we've seen it already. Before their primary even casts one vote, they've already endorsed Hillary Clinton. You know what that means. That she is bought and paid for, just like my legislature is bought and paid for, and no changes will be made. So all the things that we talk about up here, the politics is a large part of what's stopping this. And we need a president to say the teachers union is not going to be a part of this solution, and we need to change laws state by state like Governor Walker did in Wisconsin.
So let me get into that. We had 2 recall elections in Wisconsin. When those reforms, which went to paycheck protection and those issues, they tried to recall our legislature, they failed. Then they tried to recall our governor, and they failed. They tried to take over the Supreme Court, and they failed. So we've had these fights as well at Wisconsin. So we've seen these fights play out at the state level. And Jeb, I know you had a similar fight with the teachers union. My friend Bob Woodson, and my guess is he'll say this later, he calls sort of the status quo in the poverty space the poverty industrial complex. It's sort of another way of saying there's this entrenched special interest at the national level that is there to just protect the status quo. We've got 80 different programs with this huge budget, and they fund the status quo. They fund the interest groups. They fund doing the same thing over and over and over, and then we'll get the predictable results, which is why the war on poverty is clearly a stalemate. So you've taken on these fights at your state level. How do you take this fight on at the national level? How do you challenge these complexes? How do you challenge these interest groups and succeed at the national level? Jeb?
I don't think we should try to do it in the national level and on education.
No, but how do you break it down?
You break it down by having a president working with a reform-minded speaker, convincing the Senate to get going. To say, look, if a state wants to take its early childhood education plan, Florida has the largest voucher program for 4-year-olds in the country. 140,000 kids go to private schools for a half-day program. And it helps us with our early literacy efforts. We've had the greatest gains in learning for the little guys in the country. We started at a really low base. Hispanic, African-American kids are in the top 5. Learning disabled kids, low-income kids are all in the top 5 based on the nation's report card. If the state of Florida wanted to expand its 4-year-old program, collapse all this money, give it to the state, and hold us to account for better outcomes. You eliminate the infrastructure around all this money that does fight to keep the system in place. I mean, Head Start is an $8,000 a year per kid number. Well, maybe in Florida we have better outcomes with lower cost, and maybe we should be able to have that power. And by the way, along the way, we're also empowering church-based organizations because it's an essential element of their mission now. A lot of the faith-based organizations are providing the service. What's wrong with that? Why would we always assume that it has to be this top-down driven approach? On the Title I money, is it essential to have this bureaucracy around Title I money? I don't know how it is, Chris, in New Jersey, but 80% of the bureaucrats in the Department of Education in Tallahassee were there to fill out the forms for 10% of the money that goes to education, which is the federal government's Title I monies, the IDEA monies, whatever it is. I mean, this is a joke. We're not improving education because we have bureaucrats on one side filling out forms for bureaucrats on the other side with no outcome measures, and no one seems to care if kids aren't learning because they're not. Flip this around on its head and focus on getting learning gains. Education should be about children learning, not about the economic interests of the adults. And so let states do it. Not every state would. In case of places you may have entrenched interests that win the day. California won't be the first place where this will happen. But I can promise you that it would happen. It could happen here in South Carolina.
Absolutely.
And it could happen in Florida. It could happen in a lot of other places. And when it happens there, then it becomes an example for other people to follow.
This is where conservative principles make a difference. This is where conservative principles applied to this problem make a major difference, which is it's a constitutional, it's federalism, it's local control, and those big ideas. But at the end of the day, what ends up happening in these debates at the federal level is the left says, oh, block grants mean you just don't care. Block grants mean you're not, prioritizing it. So they kind of say that if you don't make this a national priority, a federal program with a federal agency, then you really just don't care. That is that mindset has given us these results we have today. So breaking that up, and block grants means you actually care so much that you want to empower people who are on the ground fighting the problem and giving them the tools they need to actually solve these problems because they screwed it up at the federal level.
How does contributing money to the problem from the federal level indicate not caring? I mean, this is what Ben said before. This is about folks in the federal government who have a philosophy that is, they get to pick the winners and losers. They care less about success. Give you a perfect example of this in New Jersey. I proposed to eliminate the corporate business tax completely in New Jersey. The Democrats came back to me with a tax credit type program. And I said to them, they kept increasing the tax credit program for job creation. And I said to them, all you're doing is eliminating the corporate tax through the back door, because the more of these credits, the less corporate tax we're going to bring in. And one of the leaders of the legislature looked at me and said, yeah, but then we get to decide who gets the money. I mean, that is, I'm telling you, that's the philosophy. You know it, Paul. That's the difference. It's not about who cares more, who doesn't. It's that they want to decide who gets what.
Absolutely.
And our view is we just want it to be successful. And I don't care who's successful. I don't care whether it's someone who I've never met before in my life or someone who I have. I don't care whether it's someone that I like or someone I don't like. I want great ideas and work ethic to be rewarded in this country again, not have people in Washington picking winners and losers. And that's the underpinning of that philosophy. No doubt in my mind about it.
And the unfortunate reality of it, those folks in Washington, the folks in Washington who are making those decisions, who are so far away from a kid, are making about, on average, $108,000 per employee at the Department of Education, where a teacher's making about $50,000. So making sure that we eliminate as much of the Department of Education on the federal level as possible only means good news for the students. And when you look around here, and Jeb, Ben, if you look around the back, you'll see students on the front row and on the periphery, on the sides, standing around here. And you've done a great job in Florida of making sure that K through 12 is fixed in a profound way. The jobs of the future, 44% of the jobs of the future are going to be the middle skill jobs. Jobs that you don't quite need the bachelor's degree, but you need more than a high school diploma. Why don't you guys have a conversation about how we make sure that those jobs are filled by our kids?
Well, when I was in high school, they used to have vocational education where you could learn, how to become an electrician, a plumber. You could learn welding. I was recently talking to a CEO of a big company, and he says, I can't find any welders. Yeah. He says, I would gladly pay an apprentice welder $80,000 a year. You're not going to get that coming out of college in many cases. And I think we need to recognize that there are a whole multitude of different talents and skills that are important to make a society work. And, you don't have to be a neurosurgeon. You could be a plumber. In fact, have you heard about the plumber? The neurosurgeon had some plumbing work done. And the plumber gave him the bill, and it was $2,700. And he said, $2,700? I don't get that for a procedure, and I'm a neurosurgeon. And the plumber said, I didn't get that when I was a neurosurgeon either. But the point being, there's a wide variety of different types of skills that are necessary to make a society like ours flourish. We also need to be thinking about innovation in education. There are computer programs, for instance, that can look at the way a kid solves 5 algebra problems, and based on that, it knows what they don't know. And it can go back and tutor them and bring them up to speed. The same thing a good algebra teacher can do, but the algebra teacher can only do it for one student at a time. the program can do it for a whole class, a whole city, a whole state. We need to begin to take advantage of that, particularly to close the gap in our STEM problems with vis-a-vis the rest of the world. We can work on virtual classrooms where we can take the very best teachers and put them in front of 1 million students at a time instead of 30 students at a time. And, you know, we need to reward good teachers. You know, what do you get for being a good teacher? Unlike in the private sector where you get rewarded for being a good teacher, you get more work to do. You know, that kind of discourages them. So, you know, it's a whole conglomeration of things that we have to look at on the educational, but recognize that in the agricultural age, we could produce more corn, wheat, and barley than anybody. We were known as the breadbasket of the world. It didn't matter whether you could solve a quadratic equation. In the industrial age, all you needed was a strong back and a willingness to work. You could do well. But now we're in the information age. We're in the technological age. We must adjust. And you go into a factory now, you won't see a whole lot of people in there, but the ones who are in there, they're working on a computer. They're doing all kinds of things that are very technologically oriented. And we just need to take that to the next level for us as a society.
So you know, a lot of the conversations we're having really relates to we have these systems in government, not just the federal government, although that's kind of the poster child for today's conversation. Government in general is a mid-20th century organizational model. It's industrial, and the world has radically changed. I mean, we're living in a dramatically different world. And Washington's not going to be the place where these breakthroughs take place. But in education, Ben, to follow up on what you said, imagine a system, because we have technologies to follow this, where you move to a competency-based model, where a child reaches their God-given ability each and every year, so they could do the work in half a year to get a year's worth of knowledge. They could get an AA degree or an AS degree by graduating from high school. We're holding kids back because we have a funding model that was based in the 1950s or even earlier, based on little butts in a seat. 180 days, you basically breathe in and out, and you're going to get the money. The system kind of is rewarded for that, and that doesn't have anything to do with learning. If you had a system where you reward improvement, where kids that struggle are not just pushed back, they have to master the material, and kids that can excel can do it faster, you would deal with this learning gap that is one of the great challenges for kids stuck in poverty. You would do it at a far faster rate. So how do we do it? Well, you're not going to do it from Washington, because 10% of the education dollars come from Washington. You've got to liberate. You've got to have courageous politicians that take on these very powerful economic interests of the adults, and then the federal government should reward them. We shouldn't just fund the beast. We ought to be funding people that have the strength and character to take on these obsolete systems, to liberate teachers to be able to do what they can do. And harnessing technology is a key element of that. It could be done, but it's not going to happen unless state legislatures across this state do it. You're not going to get it from Washington.
A focus on outcome-based.
Completely.
And think about, building off what Jeb said, I think about how obsolete our entire system is, and how it's the same as it was in the 19th century. We got rows of desks facing forward, one person standing in front of a black or a whiteboard, talking to them for 180 days, when we used to have to get those kids out of school to go and tend the fields based on the agrarian calendar. Yet the rest of the world is spending much more time in school than our kids are. Longer school days and longer school years. We need to go to that kind of model. And we also need to use technology much differently, as Ben talked about. I mean, think about all of us now. In the age of smartphones and iPads and all the rest, our children think differently. They don't just learn differently, they think differently. When any of us have a problem, if you're going to be really honest, when any of adults have problems with their smartphone, you hand it to your 13-year-old child. That's what I do. I mean, I hand my phone to Bridget when I can't figure it out, and Bridget's 12 years old, and she hits a couple of buttons, and all of a sudden gives back, here you go, Dad, it's done. You know, their minds work differently. They've been exposed to something that me and Jeb and Ben were never exposed to at their age because the technology didn't exist. So why not use the advantage that we now get from that? Why are kids still carrying around, 40-pound backpacks on their back? I see it with my kids every morning when I take them to school. They're lugging these things in there. Every kid, if we're going to spend money this way and we're going to try to push it that way, the way the federal government could do it is to make sure that the money we're spending is without strings and saying, let's improve technology. Every kid should just be carrying an iPad. You could download, instead of outdated books that they're carrying around that are 3 and 4 years old, they could download the most current material, and they're more comfortable working on that stuff than they are lugging those books around. We may feel as if the world is passing us by based on the way we used to do it. But here's the ugly news, it is. And what we need to do is make sure that our kids are given that technology. Their minds work differently. Let's adjust. And lastly, as Jeb said, I think absolutely right, we're not compensating, Ben said it too, we're not compensating teachers based on their success. We're basing their compensation on how long they're there. Right. Well, sometimes how long you're there is an indicator of your success. Sometimes it's exactly opposite. We just fought a case in New Jersey with a teacher who was late to school 100 times in 2 years. And the school district finally fired the teacher. It was grieved by the union, and the arbitrator reinstated the teacher. Yeah. Right? So in a system like that, with just this one example that's happening thousands of times throughout the country, these kids have no shot unless we have the political courage to look at these unions in the eye and say, your day is over. You have failed. Your day is over. We need a new day.
Amen. We're down to our last 3 minutes in this panel. It's time for us to wrap it up. How do we reset the expectations of the American people to look to conservatives for solving the problem of poverty? Without any question, we've heard some really good ideas that will work anywhere, at any time, in every place in America. How do we make sure that happens? How's that paradigm shift going to happen?
A minute each.
I think we have to be willing to go into the den of the lion. Last spring when I went to the National Action Network of Al Sharpton, everybody thought I was nuts. But the
How
fact
is Al doing?
Indeed. But when I started talking to people about empowerment, turning your own dollars over to create wealth, about the effects of out-of-wedlock births, about what education does, about the many contributions that black people had made to America. I ended up with Elijah McCoy, who invented the automatic lubrication system for locomotive engines. And he had so many inventions, people would say, is that a McCoy? Is that the real McCoy? By the time I got finished, standing ovation, they all wanted pictures. I went to NALIO,
10 seconds.
National Association of Latino Affected. And the point being, when we go there and we talk about what we believe, they actually resonate with it, and we have to stop having this phobia. We have much better policies than the Democrats do, who keep them.
Jeb?
You gotta go sell it. The good news is we have a huge opportunity here because the president's policies have failed. The social system has been torn asunder, and now we have to act. And our ideas are the best ideas. And I would follow the Ryan model. Go listen first. Go learn. Develop the policies from the bottom up, and once you listen and learn, then you have a chance to lead and go persuade people that there's a better way, because people know what we have today has failed, and I think that's the better way of going.
Excellent. Chris?
Yep. This is your question, Tim, at its essence is a political question, because if you don't put the political muscle behind being able to do this, you're not going to have the authority to govern. We as Republicans have to go back to campaigning in places where we're uncomfortable. We should stop going to the Chamber of Commerce lunches. They're wonderful. They're great for our egos. They give us a standing ovation on the way in and the way out. But we got their votes already for the most part, and we should go there once to say thank you and then not go back again. Fact is, we need to be going into African-American churches. We need to be going into the Hispanic communities and the barrios to make sure that we do, and Jeb's right, Paul's right on this, we go there first to listen. Don't go there first with some 10-point plan, because they don't want to hear it. What they want is to be listened to. Listening is empowering. And first we have to listen. And our party has failed in going into those places because we've said, well, we don't get instant gratification back. So therefore, why go there? And we narrow our sights on what we can do and how we can build this party. The fact is, these folks in every neighborhood in this country know that we're troubled, and they want to hear from everybody. And we need to go there, show up, and campaign in places where we're uncomfortable. Then we'll get the political authority to be able to make the changes all three of us have talked about.
Let's hear it for Jeb Bush, Ben Carson, and Chris Christie.
Thank you, Doctor.
Hey,
thank you, Senator.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for making the trip. This is great.
Absolutely.
Hey,
Thanks, Paul.
nice meeting you in person. Finally. Yeah.
Very good.
Nice.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for making the trip.
Keep up the good work. Hey, Tim. Always good to see you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Okay?
God bless you.
I think so. I'm down in Las Vegas.
We'll see you again soon.
You did a good job.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks, Dr. Carson. Wow. What do you think of that type of conversation? And I want to apologize. We're thrilled with the demand in the room. We didn't recognize it. We know there are lots of people who've been standing through this whole thing. We're about to enter a 15-minute break. And as I mentioned before, Ms. Fiorina is not able to be here for the second panel. We're going to shorten the second panel. It's going to be with Governor Huckabee, Senator Scott, and the Speaker. And I want to remind you that if you enjoyed this conversation, we want you to go to kempforum.com, sign up to be an opportunity voter. Join us. We need your help. We need your voices. We want you all active. And we want to partner with you to make sure that there are conversations like this, that the country will hear these voices talking about issues that are substantive and in great need. And I want to take one other quick personal point of privilege to thank our corporate sponsors who make it possible. We love small business, and big business has stepped up to help sponsor this event. And I just wanted to recognize Boeing and Ford, our power sponsors, who have given an awful lot to help make this happen, as well as our opportunity sponsors, Microsoft, Save the Children Action Network, AFLAC, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina, United Health Group, our expanding sponsors, Bread for the World, Generation Opportunity Institute, the Ron Terwilliger Foundation for Housing America's Families, Google, and our learning sponsors, Mosaic and the Charter Schools Association of the United States, something like that. Sorry, Jeannie, if I got it wrong. You all have been wonderful. I appreciate it. You've got 15 minutes. I know seats are at a premium. Let's remember the spirit of the event and be kind to one another. And we are bringing in some more chairs, and we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thank you.